Welcome to Foodytime. I'm Jay Fettigan, and this week I'll be talking with cookbook enthusiast Melissa Vaughn. Melissa works at the Bryn Mawr bookstore in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And if you're ever in Cambridge, you should check it out. They've got a terrific selection, and she's really knowledgeable. Melissa, thank you so much for being part of Foodytime. Why don't we start with just tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was born in the 60s, and so I spent a lot of my formative years in the 70s, and I was one of the few little girls who had a mom that worked full time. And it's just fascinating when you can do things for yourself, whether it's cooking or laundry or fixing something, so it's just one of those skills I was always interested in. And as I got older, more complicated things got interesting to me. And then the science of it was also interesting to me.
I understand besides your day job, you
Mhm.
also work at the Bryn Mawr bookstore. Is that correct?
Yes, each volunteer has a section that they curate, and my section is cookbooks.
Are
Mhm.
cookbooks a good or bad gift choice?
I would say, unless you know the person very well and you know that they're particularly looking for that cookbook or that kind of cookbook, that it's a bad gift idea. A lot of cookbooks are very lovely to look at, aren't very practical. So I think because they're pretty to look at, people love to give them as gifts.
What if I come up, if I give you a little list, and you could tell me or make any recommendations or thoughts that you have about cookbooks
Sure.
um, is there a good cookbook for somebody that doesn't know how to cook and might want to learn how to cook?
That's a very good question, and I get that a lot. What's funny is I get parents coming into my bookstore and they beeline to the joy of cooking, no matter what edition, which is interesting because
Mhm.
the editions over the years are very, very different.
Right.
And they also tend to buy up what they remember, like the Fannie Farmer Boston Cooking School cookbooks. So
Mm.
I would say those are the two basics.
So people go back to the what I would consider like the classics.
Yes. What's curious to me is the things that I considered classic when I was younger. We had Joy of Cooking. We had a few Julia Child cookbooks, and those are still big sellers, the
Mhm.
Julia Child cookbooks. We get a lot of donations of New York Times editors' cookbooks. So Craig Claiborne, Pierre Fernet, but nobody buys those. And I always considered those to be classics because they were broad. They were like upscale Joy of Cooking.
I remember when I was starting to cook, say in my 20s and
Mhm.
30s, that a lot of people look down on books like The Joy of Cooking or
Mhm.
the Betty Crocker cookbooks. Or is that still the case? Or I never thought they were justified because sometimes you just need to,
It
learn how long
really
it takes to hard boil an egg.
It really depends on what you're looking for. And the other thing to consider, I mean, yes, those were great books and they probably still are. I still have, what was it, a McCall's cookbook that my
Oh,
mother had, because it's got hands down one of the best and simplest chocolate mousse recipes I've ever seen.
hmm.
I mean, you can always get something out of some cookbook.
And what about maybe a good cookbook for somebody that finds cooking intimidating?
I have seen several um, sort of cookbooks that are meant to hold your hand,
Hmm.
that are meant to be friendly. Mark Bittman, How to Cook Everything. That's a good one. I have a vegetable cookbook called Vegetables Every Day, and it literally, for every sort of common vegetable that you can find in the grocery store, it's got simple recipes.
Yeah, I have a nephew who's vegan, vegetarian, and he's in his mid 20s, and he's living on his own for the first time. And my wife and I gave him an Asian cooking book because a
Mhm.
lot of vegan,
Yep.
vegetarian cookbooks, to my taste, tend to be a little bland. Um,
Yep.
do you have any? What would you do
Well, another way to go is an Indian cookbook.
Mhm.
Same kind of reasoning. This is a culture that lives on pulses and lentils and things like that, and has a lot of lactose intolerance, same as East Asia.
Mhm.
And so, if you want to find something general purpose that is 95% vegan, you can't go wrong there.
because I am not, I don't really use cookbooks.
Mhm.
I'm not a cookbook guy.
Sure.
I like to use I'm not like a baker has to follow a recipe from
Mhm.
beginning to end, or everything's
Yeah,
going to end up, pretty terrible.
sure.
Uh, but I tend to use cookbooks where it's just uh, because I want a reference for how many carrots do you put in versus onions versus
Mhm.
potatoes? How long
For
do
the
you do
stew,
bake
yep.
a stew? Just the
Yeah,
sort of basic stuff.
of course.
How do you sell somebody maybe like me, or who doesn't really use them or necessarily like cookbooks? What's the draw?
Well, it really depends. If you don't need them, don't buy them. That's fine.
Mhm.
There will come a time when you will need one if you're baking something, absolutely.
Right.
For proportions, I'm always pulling out Joy of Cooking to look at the proportions for basic things,
Mhm.
a beef stew versus something else. I find it hard to sell cookbooks to a lot of people because a lot of people are just going on the internet to get recipes. The one nice thing about cookbooks is if you own them and you try a recipe and it doesn't work, you can put an X next to it in your book.
That's
You tend
great.
not
That's a
to
good
do
point.
that with, there are no reverse bookmarks on the internet. So,
Right. That's a great tip. So, Alexa and smart devices certainly has
mhm,
had a pretty big impact on how everybody cooks these days.
mhm,
And but I can't help thinking that there's also something that's lost
mhm.
in that, besides the bookmark thing. But we have cookbooks that were my wife's mother's cookbooks, or grandmother and aunt, and they're handwritten notes in the margins, and there's stains of and
Mhm.
what do you think about that? Do you think
Oh,
that there's
sure. Absolutely a nostalgia factor. My daughter and I have things that we've cut out of magazines and are just sort of floating around in loose leaf, clear sheet protectors.
right?
And and we always know, and things that my mother wrote for me when I moved out of the house after college. And we
Hmm.
have those now in sheet protectors because they're getting worn. Like the one on how to make meatballs is completely soaked through with grease. So, but, but I can't give it up. It's a great recipe, again, with proportions.
Well, and it's a bit of a time capsule, that's something that reminds
Mhm.
you of other
Right.
experiences in time,
No, yeah. I have a
with food.
cheesecake, sure, cheesecake recipe from my grandmother and she died young in her 50s. And so that's sort of a treasured kind of thing. It's a pretty basic cheesecake, but it makes me think of her. And it's
Right.
written on her note paper and all that. So,
That's great. I mean, because that seems to be something that you won't ever get in a
right,
online. Uh,
right.
uh, and it also, I imagine, has had a financial impact on the writers and on the publishers of cookbooks.
Mhm.
Has this been a difficult time?
I would think that the market would tend to be considered glutted at this point. I
Mm.
think that's why you see so much specialization because everybody's trying to carve out a new niche. So,
Can you talk about that, about specialization and niches? What does that
well,
look
I
like?
mean, for example, I've got a cookbook that's just about caramel, all
Okay.
about, it's not a baking cookbook, it's not a pastry cookbook, it's not a confectionery cookbook, it's just about caramel. And so, can you imagine? It's a whole
I
book dedicated to caramel.
I
I've
can see
got
it.
one on just beans, what to do with beans, which is pretty funny because beans are just beans, and a lot of people use them as filler. Like look at the Galloping Gourmet, who after I guess I don't know if it was he or his wife, one of them had a serious health concern. He
Mhm.
he changed his whole act,
Right.
changed it all up and became a light sort of cook.
Mm.
And that was his new niche. Um,
My mother used to love the Galloping Gourmet
yeah.
on TV, and I think that she may have appreciated the fact that sometimes he would imbibe a little too much during the. And I suspect that in the bookstore, the Bryn Mawr bookstore, that you must come across some that are, I won't say crazy, but a little funny. Or do any of them strike you as like somebody really wrote this cookbook?
Well, it's funny. People will inevitably just, you're cleaning out your house, you're throwing books into a box, you're not looking, you're not sorting them. And so I will get boxes of cookbooks that will include things like their Oster blender manual from 1965, because it's got recipes in it.
Right, of course.
I once got a very innocuous looking, it looked like an animated, 50-page self-published book on just potatoes, how to prepare potatoes. And I was about to give it to our downstream charity. And then I noticed that the foreword was written by Truman Capote. So,
Oh, wow.
so I said, oh, well, I'm hanging on to that. That's pretty interesting.
That's very interesting.
He did his chef friend a favor and wrote a foreword to her potato cookbook. So the kinds of things I find, I don't know, hard to deal with are all of the endless fad diet cookbooks. It seems like the prevailing sentiment changes every 5 years. So the thing is that I think, yes, we're all human beings, but I think our nutritional needs are subtly different from each other. So no one size fits all. And it annoys me that people write these things as though they are a cure-all and people will buy them out of desperation. So I tend not to sell those in my store. So
this brings me to, there are a lot of cookbooks, celebrity cookbooks, that look to me like they're nothing more than a vanity project.
Yes, I
And
agree.
there have been some great celebrities, like Vincent Price, for example, was an excellent cook, wrote great
We
cookbooks.
got one of his cookbooks in the store, and I was delighted and fascinated. And you can tell who's got an understanding of food and who doesn't.
Right.
So yeah, I think you're right.
And then I look at like Gwyneth Paltrow and I've looked at her cookbooks.
Yeah. See, I have a saying: you never trust the skinny people with food. So.
It makes perfect sense. That's,
yeah.
The other thing that I think is fascinating about cookbooks and cooking in general is, and I want to ask you, a lot of people explore different cultures through cookbooks and through their food, and which I hope at least is, can kind of help people understand each other better. Do you think about that? Is that something that you've experienced, or?
Encourage it. The thing that's complicated is that yes, in Boston we're very lucky. We have a lot of regional markets that are ethnic and specific, and we just have a lot available to us. But say you want to get into Ethiopian cooking, like where are you going to get injera? Are you going to make it yourself?
Right.
I find that with a lot of regional cookbooks from outside the United States, you're having to do a lot of substitution.
One of the things that I find often when I'm looking at recipes or whatever is, I don't have some specific ingredient. And is there anything, I don't know if there's a cookbook or anything that's like a slide rule of substitutions, or,
I think there are substitutions. I'm not sure it's like, okay, you don't have cilantro, you can use X. I think it's more like you don't have butter, you can use coconut oil, so it's something in the same family, but I think there are some things you can substitute and some you can't. I do find it hilarious when I read comments on online recipes where someone says, well, I substituted applesauce for the eggs and I used, safflower oil instead of butter, and this just tastes terrible. Well, of course it tastes terrible.
Right. Look at what you did.
You've rendered it not food. So.
But getting kind of back to the family cookbooks, it sounds like you have them yourself, where you assemble a notebook of your favorite recipes, either that are torn out of magazines or passed on. Do you ever get anything like that? Do people ever pass those down onto a bookstore or anything? These binders of family recipes?
I don't get binders. I get a lot of books donated where things are tucked into the pages, either notes or something ripped out of a newspaper. Because newspapers used to publish a lot of recipes.
Right.
So that's always interesting when you find ephemera that come out of the book that was donated. I don't think I do get, I'm going to call them charity cookbooks, churches or what did they used to call them? Ladies auxiliary clubs would publish them.
Yeah.
And the thing is they were good projects, good community projects, but
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that they were good food. The 60s, you'll get a lot of that weird 60s cocktail party food, which nobody would eat now, so.
Well, there's a funny, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a funny a TikTok who looks up old recipes and then makes them online. And, you know, some of these recipes, especially from the 60s that involve Jello and
Jello, the
pickles.
overuse of Jello. I mean, it must have been a space age fascination that people had, which I don't get it. I mean, Jello's fun to eat, but I wouldn't eat celery Jello. But that was a very big seller,
Yes, no, um, it seems to me, and I could be mistaken, but it seems that cookbooks, at least in America, um, uh, there seems to be it's primarily women who are writing the cookbooks, and am I mistaken with that, or is that seem to?
I mean, the joy of cooking was a, a grandmother and then a mother, and then now the son has taken over. So this
Oh,
third generation is a man, and he's in
mhm.
his 70s. I don't know if somebody's going to follow him, but
Mm. I was looking up like MLK Fisher, and one of the things that I
Mhm.
have always appreciated about her is that the art of eating, that
Yeah.
it isn't. Where do you think people fall in terms? I know that it seems to be two camps. I'll try and
Mhm.
simplify my question here. There seems to be two camps of people that cook because they love to eat, and
Mhm.
people that cook because they love the process of cooking.
Right.
And it seems that there are different styles of cookbooks that are focused
Oh,
at.
yeah. So, yeah, there's all kinds of, I mean, we all eat, so there's all different takes on food. I think that's what it is. And there are people who are about the process. There are people about explaining the process. But in the end, I think, I guess, yeah, it's a really good question. I see a lot of cookbooks designed more for entertainment use than home use.
Mhm.
Would you go all out and make Julia Child's Boeuf Bourguignon if it's just you? I mean, I would for me because I like it, but
Right.
not everybody would. They would make it for a party though.
I know
Sure.
you were saying your daughter has taken up cooking, and
Mhm.
that you recently, I guess, made jambalaya.
Oh no, I made jambalaya when she was 8.
Could you tell me about what that
She's
was like?
almost 18 now, and when she was 8, I have two daughters, and the older one wants nothing to do with cooking. She'll
Uh,
make a few things just
mm,
to feed herself, but the younger one is really into cooking, and she makes probably the best focaccia I've ever had.
well,
Just amazing. Everything she puts her mind to, it comes out great. But she is fearless. When she was little, when she was 8, I asked her to help me when I was making jambalaya.
mhm,
She picked up 18 oysters and shucked them for me. Had never done that before.
mhm.
Which is, I know adults who won't do that.
I wouldn't.
She she cleaned a pound of shrimp for me, peeled and took the vein out and everything. She cleavered up a whole chicken on the bone. She cleavered it up into small 1-inch pieces with a cleaver, age
At
8.
8 years old?
Yeah.
Oh my
So
goodness.
I know she's just one of these Renaissance people that just learns all kinds of skills, and that's just one of them for her. So
Oh, and it must be great to cook with her and
it
feel like
is
you're
really, I
having.
mean, when she lets me in the kitchen. She's definitely one of those people, "Just get out of my kitchen," which is fine. So,
Well, it's funny. I have two 17-year-old twin boys, but one
mhm,
is very into cooking. And, maybe as a response to me not using recipes, he only cooks from recipes and
mhm.
follows everything to the letter. And I'm always having to order and buy all these unusual ingredients that I would have never used before,
Well,
wouldn't even think to use.
that's curious. I guess, I mean, my comment on that would be if it's unusual enough that it's something you don't use normally, then yeah, I think you should follow a recipe because you don't know.
Right, right,
So you don't know how much of that to use, how much ancho chili powder, or whatever. So,
right. And I my mother was not a tremendously good cook, but my grandparents were great cooks, and I
mhm,
learned whatever I learned about cooking from watching them in the kitchen. They were both Italian from Italy, and
mhm.
so they never used recipes or
Mhm.
whatever. They just knew everything off the top of their head, and that was uh,
Sure.
kind of how I learned how to cook.
Yeah. My
Um,
Italian relatives too.
yeah.
but
Yeah.
not my Irish
No,
relatives.
well, no, me either. That's I have Irish and Italian as well.
Yeah.
So, given I guess what are a lot of challenges in the market now, do you see changes coming for cookbooks? Do you see is it is online going to ultimately?
So I think you, like with any publishing, you're going to see waxing and waning in the industry. And I think with something like cooking, you're going to see more waning because it's not like you're writing about politics and somebody wants a history or a whole digest of what your thoughts are on this one particular thing. Um, Somebody will buy a book for that, but they won't buy your book on caramel because you can
Right.
look up caramel recipes, you can look up caramel technique, you can look up anything online these days.
One of my kind of pet peeves when it comes to the online recipes, and I don't know if you experience this too, but it seems like you have to go through and read an entire War and Peace of Mama's Appalachian life growing up before you
Right.
get to, and I mean, it's like these people are paid by the word or something,
I
you know?
think one, they are, and two, I think I have read, and I'm not sure if this is true, I haven't sourced it, but that they have to do that to prevent their recipe from being ripped off. Like it's considered protected work if
Mhm.
it's longer or if it's more words than recipe. So
Do you have uh, maybe some favorite cookbooks that you could recommend? Is there anything that stands out that for people who will be listening to this who want to either start their own cookbook library or or are very interested and just are looking for more things to add to? Because I know a lot of people. It seems that people that have cookbooks have a
right.
lot of cookbooks.
Well, and it's funny, I actually I can show you mine if you want to see
Sure.
them. I do have a lot. So we are in my pantry. I've got two levels of cookbooks here, and they really span everything. I think it's good to have, I like Julia Child's cookbooks. I think they're easy to follow. I think she wrote for the home chef. I do think some of her original ones suffer from different food source than we have now. You don't have your butcher, and you certainly don't have the cuts of meat and somebody taking care over your cuts of meat like you did back then. But she's good with basics in talking about how to do things. So any real basic Julia Child cookbook is great. This one is from Julia Child's Kitchen. Of course, there's Mastering the Art of French Cooking.
Mhm.
The Way to Cook is a great one. If you want to talk Italian, I love Marcella Hazan. You just can't go wrong. I've got all of her cookbooks. This is one of my favorites, Marcella's Italian Kitchen. It's just fantastic. It's just good, simple Italian cuisine with very fresh ingredients.
Looks well loved.
Yeah, it is. If you want to make pasta from scratch,
Mhm.
Giuliano Bugiali, he's very, very precise. If you want to talk science, Cookwise by Shirley Corrier, or the Cooks Illustrated people have also put out a good compendium on food science, which is really good.
What do you mean by, for people that don't understand, what do you mean by food science?
Food science, do you know why an egg turns white when you cook it? Do you know why you do certain things a certain way? Why certain cooking techniques have to be precise?
Hmm.
Um, how you keep, I don't know, things from getting bitter, for example, when you're cooking them. Food science book, fantastic. Let's see. Oh, Carol Field, baking. If you want to make any kind of Italian sort of baked goods, Carol Field, fantastic. I love Carol Field's books.
Right.
If you want to be very precise, if you wanted to make your own wedding cake, let's say, or something extremely precise, Rose Levy Berenbaum, can't go wrong. Cake Bible. She also has a pie Bible too, I think. I don't have that one though. That's probably good for now. I mean, I have lots and lots of cookbooks. They're all different specialties and things. Hold on. I found with regional cookbooks that you don't have to go with one person over another. I think it's exciting enough to get out of your rut within, look into a cuisine that you don't really know too much about. And really the biggest challenge will be finding equivalents to what they have in the recipe. There's a specific ham that they sell only in China, so you're going to have to approximate it with something here. I could go on and on.
No, this is great. Yeah, often I think that this is exactly what people are looking for, is somebody who's knowledgeable, who can more or less hold their hand and show them.
Oh, yeah. And when people come into the store, I do that. I ask them what they're looking for. Sometimes they're looking for something specific and we just don't happen to have a copy. A lot of people come in and they want it. Yotam Ottolenghi cookbook, great Israeli chef, sort of newish age cooking, which is really good. But they sell like hotcakes. Same with Joanne Chang's flour. She has a bunch of bakeries in Boston, and people love Joanne Chang's works. So,
well, terrific. This has been great.
Well, thank you.
It's very entertaining and informative at the same time. So I really appreciate you doing this. Thanks a lot.
Of course. Oh, thank you. Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you too.
All right.
Well, that was my interview with Melissa Vaughn, who's a cookbook enthusiast, and she really is knowledgeable when it comes to cookbooks. And if you're ever in Cambridge, should stop by the Bryn Mawr bookstore and get some advice on cookbooks and cooking from her. Until next time, this is Foodie Time with Jay Fetty.